Davis Martin was fantastic on the mound last night. So trade him? Let's discuss on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, and write for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the FanSided Network. And I've also covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, the hitting was awful last night, but there's a lot of pitching business to get to. So this is going to be a pitching-heavy show because, well, the starting pitching has been great outside of Bryce Wilson and some Schaumburg starts, but the bullpen has been atrocious. And let's discuss first Davis Martin's great outing last night and whether the team should actually trade him at the deadline. Then the Sox need someone to eat up innings in the starting rotation with Martin Perez on the 60-day IL. It looks like Adrian Houser is the latest candidate to gobble up innings. And finally, let's discuss if it's time to start thinking the shine on pitching director Brian Bannister is fading. All right, so Davis Martin deserved better last night. I mean, he was straight up dealing through 7 1/3 innings. When he exited, he allowed just 1 run and 4 hits, although his final line says he allowed 2 earned runs as Cam Boozer failed to keep the game close at 1-0 when he allowed the base runner he inherited to score, and then 3 more runs because he gave up a grand slam. On a night when the wind was blowing in, somehow Cam Boozer still offered up a pitch that was tattooed by Jose Rodriguez to left field. And no offense and the bullpen not keeping the game close, well, that's been the White Sox brand of baseball over the past 5 games, which coincides with a 5-game losing streak. And some of you may wonder if Will Venables should have lifted Martin in the 8th. But I'm going to give Venables some grace because Martin was at 92 pitches, and I believe the television stat that they gave out was this was the first start he made where he actually got into the 8th inning, where he actually started in the first inning. But, man, he was effective. So I get why you're saying, well, he should have been lifted, but he allowed, a hit to get on, a runner to get on. And, Cam Boozer, he's supposedly the closer now, according to the television broadcast. And he should be able to keep the game close. And he failed completely because, well, I'll get into it in the third segment. But outside of one bad start in Detroit and Kansas City, Martin has been very good this season. 3.49 ERA, a respectable 4.05 FIP, and a 5.5% walk percentage. And he's, he's getting some help from his defense with, the ERA and the FIP difference. And his expected ERA is 5.16. So definitely getting help, which is fine because the pitcher is supposed to get help from his defense. I mean, he's a spin guy. He's not exactly going to be, missing bats a lot. But the goal is get weak contact, get ground balls, and he's doing that. And then obviously don't, give extra base runners opportunities by walking. And he's got a solid 1.27 whip. So obviously this kick change that he's been developing and crafting is still just straight up nasty. So trade him, right? Because credit to Shy Sox fan Mike of Sports Mockery. He tweeted this out, and he's the inspiration for this segment. But for those watching on YouTube, I have it up. Obviously, if you're listening via Apple or Spotify, this is at Shy Sox fan Mike. Am I crazy for thinking the White Sox could get a fairly decent return for Davis Martin at the trade deadline? So even I have hinted in past shows that the Sox could deal Martin this year. Obviously the team is in asset collection mode. And that's why at first I thought, okay, you might want to dangle him since he probably will fetch something decent on the market. Plus he's 28 and he's not exactly a strikeout guy on the mound. He's a spin guy. And obviously spin guys can be effective, but they can also be prone to getting blown up. So there is the logic beyond, just getting conditioned to accept that the owner will never pay him. So expect these pitchers to be traded at some point. It happens. So for those that are like, I can't believe you're suggesting Davis Martin. No, it's a valid suggestion, but put me in the camp of do not trade Davis Martin now for several reasons. Because I looked at the tweet and I thought, I've been talking about that. And I know I've had, I've had some other guests on the show that have kind of hinted that maybe he might be the one that has to go because, again, they need to get more. They're in asset collection mode right now. And they don't have a lot of talented guys that are going to get impact players back. Right now, Luis Robert Jr.'s trade value, according to John Heyman, is not hot. He's not going to yield a major trade return like they were hoping for right now. He's got to get his numbers up. He's got to get out of this season starting slump at some point. He's got to maintain some consistency. So I get why why Martin might be somebody that has to be traded. And I thought that would have been the case too. But first, I was wrong on his club control clock. I actually went back and took a look at it, and I thought, because I thought at first, and I'm not the only one that thought this, that thought, maybe the White Sox want to get more guys that have a clean club control clock, because technically the clock has started on Davis Martin, but he isn't set for ARB until 2028, and he won't be a free agent until 2031. So that is enough to carry you through hopefully some competitive years. And also he'll be 34 by his walk year. So if you get some productive seasons out of him and then he walks, okay. It's actually worth keeping him. Second, now the current, and again, things change. People can change their opinion. They can change their mind and they can make suggestions. It's okay. But the current state of the young pitching actually means you got to hold on to this guy just a bit longer. You may actually have to consider him now as that fourth or fifth starter on the next, hopefully competitive starting rotation. Because think about it. Grant Taylor being a starter has been scrapped for now. They have moved him to the bullpen at AA. And it wouldn't shock me if he's up by July at some point. I think they want to deploy him as a high leverage weapon that they can use 3 or 4 times a week rather than, a guy that they can use one time every 5 days. Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith are currently the only healthy young starters in the system with high potential that could be reaching the big leagues soon. I mean, yes, Christian Opper, he just got promoted to high A, but he's still probably a few years away. But those guys also, Smith and Schultz, who you're pegging to hopefully be your aces, they have to be consistent with their command. They are struggling with their command. They've been very inconsistent right now at AA. And the otherwise potential replacements that could have pushed Martin and made him expendable, they're not available after having Tommy John surgery. Drew Thorpe, Mason Adams, Kai Bush now are not available until likely mid-2026, just like when Davis Martin wasn't available in 2023 because he had Tommy John surgery. And then Jairo Iriarte has struggled so badly at AAA, he was recently reassigned to the Arizona Complex League. I don't think anybody's picked that up yet. If you look at his news on his page, he is at the Arizona Complex League. He has not pitched for AAA Charlotte since April. And I Googled Jairo Iriarte injury. Nothing. Searched X. Nothing. You just look at his numbers and you're probably like, oh my gosh, he's going back to pitching school. They're pretty much doing the same thing they did with Colson Montgomery with his hitting, just with his pitching for Jairo Iriarte. Nick Nastrini, he's no longer being used as a starter for the Knights. So you really can't cite this young pitching depth right now as a reason the Sox can just easily move on from Martin. They don't have that anymore. Obviously I still believe in Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith anchoring the rotation for years to come. And I think Shane Smith can be that guy too. I think eventually, though, they're going to have to put him on an innings limit because he's getting close to obviously going past the most innings he's ever thrown. Sean Burke obviously has to figure out his command to be maybe that fourth guy. But then number 5 right now might be Martin or even Jonathan Cannon, who's been pitching much better after the adjustment was made to him. Baseball came for him, and he's adjusting, nicely. He's been very good. He's been very effective on the mound. But for the suggestion of, hey, maybe Davis Martin should be traded, it's not crazy because the only untouchables right now on this roster are Edgar Caro, Chase Mydroth, Shane Smith, and I'm going to give Miguel Vargas another, if he has another strong month, then yeah, he's untouchable. But Martin, I think you got to put him in that second tier where you would need a massive offer to move him. And I just don't think a team's going to give up that package right now. Well, also think about the current pitching state, too, of why you can't trade Martin. It's gotten to the point where the team is reportedly bringing in veteran Adrian Houser to eat up innings. So let's discuss the rumored signing that could happen today, next on Locked On White Sox. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop just managing your wealth. And you just stop managing your money and you start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. Well, the White Sox need someone to eat up innings better than Bryce Wilson. Enter Adrian Houser. As according to FutureSox.net, James Fox, he will be signing soon. Although the insiders, the national insiders, can't give James his flowers. Robert Murray, fan-sided, he's getting credit for getting the news first, even though James heard the rumblings, 3 days ago. For those watching on YouTube, I do have the tweet up here, and those for watching on listening on Apple or Spotify, I'll read it off here. At JamesFox917, Adrian Houser will sign with the hashtag White Sox tomorrow. He's expected to start Tuesday night's game. And this was him quote tweeting what he tweeted on May 17th. Source: the hashtag White Sox are in discussions with the recently released righty Adrian Houser. He has familiarity with bench coach Walker McKinven, was most recently pitching at AAA Round Rock, could slide into the big league rotation. And then, national Robert Murray, who does great work. He picked up on this, obviously, when, it started to become closer. So I think you got to give James credit for getting the scoop first, and then Robert for obviously bringing it to national attention. But another scrap heap signing, considering Houser was pitching for Texas's AAA affiliate before being granted free agency. That's where, again, the White Sox are shopping. They're not even shopping at the bargain bin. They're shopping at the scrap heap. They are dumpster diving. But when we last saw Houser in the majors, he was awful in 7 starts, but he did have 16 good relief outings for the Mets last year. Had a 5.84 ERA and a 4.93 FIP in 69 and a thirds innings. His ERA, though, was high last year because of getting roughed up as a starter. I think his ERA as a starter was 8, but he had a 3.28 ERA as a reliever for the Mets. In his overall career in Milwaukee, he was a very solid innings eater. So if you can get that version, then you got something. Then again, I trust the adults in the room with Walker McKinven saying, hey, Adrian's available. He can eat some innings. But again, you got to get that version. You got to get the guy that had a career year in 2021 or as close to it. You don't want what you saw in New York last year. But as MLBTradeRumors.com suggested, this could mean Sean Burke has to figure out his command in AAA. And that's where I get conflicted because, again, as I've said, I said in spring training, everydayers, you probably heard me say it. I'm fine if the Sox need a bridge guy. Again, so long as he's not blocking anyone at the minor league level who is close and can use that next step development. Can I hit the cough button 1 second? So, as I described in the first segment, Houser actually wouldn't be blocking anyone right now except for Sean Burke trying to figure things out. So that's about the only thing where I'm like, does it mean having to sacrifice Sean Burke? And again, by the time I post this, we could already know, and this could be old news, but I would still prefer to see Burke work his way through things, right? Up at the major league level. As he has pointed out, it's mostly a mechanical thing. I mean, even he's admitted it. It's a mechanical thing with his slider. He's just got to make sure he's matching up his release to his mechanics and then just finding a way to not be so either wild in the strike zone or just wild in general. Because you and I have seen this season, if he has, if his command is good and the slider and the curve are not up in the zone to be crushed, he's a darn good pitcher. And he was worthy of being the opening day starter. He's had 3 dominant outings. It's just, if he cannot command his fastball, and then he's wild all over the strike zone or just wild in general, and he's leaving that slider and the changeup up in the zone, yeah, you're going to see what you saw against the Cubs. Or you're going to see short outings because he's going to be throwing so many pitches. I mean, obviously, the obvious choice to go back to Charlotte is Jared Schuster, but again, they really like having 3 lefties in the pen, and I don't understand that. I mean, it's a nice option to have, but you should be trying to get guys that can get outs, So if you got one lefty that can only get outs, fine, roll with that guy. But again, I would just prefer that Jared Schuster goes back to AAA. You give Burke at least a few more starts, and then if he is a dud, you could switch him with Wilson. But obviously, you want Wilson to go back to the bullpen where he belongs. He's just not able to get through. I mean, because what you're hoping for right now with Wilson is he needs to have be effective and efficient, and he's not being either. I think his ERA as a starter is over 6. But bringing in Houser too right now, I'm for it. But right now the defense has been struggling, and he needs a good defense behind him because he is a ground ball pitcher. And while he was not impressive at AAA this season, MLB Trade Rumors did explain why he wasn't his numbers weren't eye-popping when he was at Round Rock. He's worked out of the rotation at AAA Round Rock, tallying 39 1/3 innings across 9 appearances. While his 5.03 earned run average is pedestrian, that's not all that uncommon in the Pacific Coast League. Houser has strong peripherals. He struck out a decent 22.8% of his opponents while running an excellent 57.3 grounder rate. So, the peripherals are still good. And again, if he can get ground ball outs, and as long as the defense doesn't, become a dumpster fire like it did at Wrigley, I think this is actually a very prudent, smart signing. I'm just still in the camp of give Sean Burke a few more starts. Because again, wins and losses don't matter. Sean Burke's development does. And I don't know if it's reached the point yet where you got to be like, oh man, he's got to go to AAA Charlotte, because he's shown that he can respond to the adversity. It's just, again, maintaining the consistency. But at the same time, they've got to get somebody that can consistently get through these innings and not tax the bullpen that is already horrendously awful for the most part. And, if Houser's got to be the guy that they're going to kick the tires on, I'm all for it, because as long as he can provide some solid starts that the team was hoping to get from Martin Perez, then I think it will be turning out to be a good signing. It's a low risk, high reward signing. Although again, I doubt you're going to get anything from him on the trade market if he somehow, comes in and actually produces solid for the next 2 months. But right now, as I've explained, there's really nobody coming up right now where he'll be blocking. This is not a Chris Flexen situation, so I'm fine with it. Maybe pitching guru Brian Bannister also can help Houser get back to having some career numbers like he did in 2021. However, is the pitching czar a bit overrated? Let's discuss next on Locked On White Sox. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, or wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available to all major podcast platforms. We'll credit my buddy Bez for being the inspiration on the next segment when I saw him tweet this out. And again, this is at Bez Beyond the Pen. Bez writes for OnTap Sportsnet. He's a friend of the show, had him on a few times. I got to get him back on because he's been on some really good heaters lately on X. He's one of my favorite favorite follows. But this is what he tweeted out. Tried to warn you jabronis about getting too hyped up over Brian Bannister. 2 years straight, he gets and cats have cooked up a bullpen that's a full-blown dumpster fire. Now, Cam Boozer supposedly has been named the team's closer, And if that is the case, that is a mistake. As I've discussed on past shows, every day, as you probably heard me, his numbers are terrible in high leverage. And he had another outing where he could just not keep the game within reach. He's supposed to come in and just get 2 more outs, keep it 1-0, and maybe the White Sox, who, the offense was terrible last night. I mean, it did not produce anything until the 9th inning, but it would have tied the game up had the game been 1-0. But again, he does not thrive in high leverage. To me, he's a decent medium leverage, and maybe bring him out with 2 outs, high leverage, just to get one guy. I think you could trust him sometimes to at least be like, okay, it's a high leverage situation. You got runners on second and third. It's 1-0. We just need 1 out, that lefty matchup. I think he can still do that. And his numbers have shown, and he has shown this season. You bring him out, if it's a 3-0 game, or, if it's a 2, 3, 4 run lead, he's been pretty solid there on both sides. But asking him to come in tight situations, he just has not been doing that. And he just doesn't, he rarely meets that moment. So I don't know who made that suggestion to be like, okay, this is our official closer. Because you probably should have been going with closer by committee still. Or, as I said, this goes back to Chris Getz that he can't find one guy. One. And a lot of the bullpen has struggled to meet the moment. And it's fair to wonder if Bannister deserves some credit, as he's supposed to be this pitching genius. And Chris Getz was hyping him up all offseason. I mean, that was the guy that he was talking about a ton. He was talking about him more than hiring Ryan Fuller. Now, first of all, let me be clear. I am in Brian Bannister, I trust. I'm still on that side. I'm still in the camp. He's had his successes, and I love his simple philosophy of develop good pitches and then throw those pitches a lot. Makes sense to me. And I have discussed the not so great bullpen state. Being more on Chris Getz I don't think being able to identify those guys off the scrap heap. He's just not very good at basically buying low and selling high. But at the same time, maybe you wonder if that's his philosophy of, again, develop good pitches. Maybe these guys just don't throw good pitches. Have we ever thought about that? And you got to wonder, will that philosophy, though, work out long term? Because, again, if you're going to be throwing your best pitches a lot, the book will be, okay, he's just going to, like with Davis Martin, where the adjustment was, well, he's going to throw his kick change. If he can't go ahead his kick change and he's got to throw us a strike, he doesn't have the velocity to get a pass. It's the same thing with Jonathan Cannon. So it does rely a lot, actually, more on the guy being effective than actually, being talented. So that's the other reason why I'm not going to totally put this right now on Brian Bannister yet, because, this still falls on Getz, as I discussed James Fegan's piece on Sox Machine in the offseason, where he did talk about the team did not pay for strikeouts. Strikeouts are expensive now, and we know that the team is not spending any money whatsoever. So the alternative is they've been going with guys that have funky deliveries and finding ways to get weak contact. So that's basically code for, Brian, get creative with who we give you, because we're signing less than bargain bin talent. We are dumpster diving. We're basically asking you, Brian, to polish turds. And that's right, I said it, because that's basically what you're asking him to do. And I think there's only so much you can do. He's acknowledged the Tommy John situation, too. I think he's explained it appropriately. If you want to get guys out at the plate who are trying to do damage, because that is now the philosophy, it's not no more Tony Gwynn's, we're just going to boop one in. We're just going to hit, we're going to single you to death. Guys are going up to the plate trying to do damage. They're trying to hit home runs. They're trying to hit doubles. They're trying to hit triples. You have to throw pitches that will stress the elbow, because you got to get those guys out. So, that's another reason why I am fine with Brian Bannister. He's at least willing to say the thing out loud. And again, Tommy John surgery, it stinks. You feel for the guys that have to go through it. But the only problem with Tommy John is you just lose time, because a lot of these guys now are bouncing back. It's become so routine. And also when it comes to, polish the you-know-what, that's always been the organization's MO. Think about it. They found a ton of, potential reclamation projects and then just asked Dom Cooper to coach him up. And Dom had his failures too. You're basically just subbing out Dom with Brian Bannister. That's what you're doing. And I think you gave Brian Bannister, a pitch lab. That's it. So, yeah, this is also another point to ownership. But as I've said in past shows, a GM worth his salt can at least find 2 or 3 guys with good enough stuff that can get out, that can get outs late. That is actually where you can measure, is this a decent GM? And because there's a lot of organizations that don't spend and they still find at least 2 or 3 guys that can come in high leverage situations and get 3 outs or 2 outs or 1 out and keep it 1-0 or not blow a save. It can be done. We've seen it. Heck, I watched Dan Kolb save games, for example. Okay. But weak contact and funky deliveries also means throwing pitches that do have to be hit, especially weak contact. And if a mistake is made, it's going to not be hit weakly. It's going to be crushed. And that has been happening too. So I get the worry. And I'm not trying to argue with Bez. I'm not calling him out. Like I said, I love Bez. I got to get him on the show at some point. I think he's got a very realistic take. It's just, I'm not ready to say, oh yeah, we got to point the finger at Bannister or even Katz. I'm just not in that camp right now because they're basically being asked to make chicken salad out of chicken bleep. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow with a Way Back Wednesday segment. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding whether Davis Martin should be traded this season, Adrian Houser possibly signing today, and no longer having faith in Brian Bannister. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at ToddJDub or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.